The metal door hissed open, revealing a sterile corridor bathed in fluorescent light. Marcus Hale's footsteps echoed against the polished floor as he made his way toward the containment wing. The weight of his security badge felt heavier than usual against his chest. "Access granted. Medical Engineer Hale. Marcus. Clearance level, Alpha," announced the disembodied voice of Area, the station's artificial intelligence. Marcus nodded out of habit, though he knew the AI couldn't see him. 6 years working at Outpost Epsilon, and he still acknowledged the machine as if it were human. Perhaps it was the loneliness of deep space that made even the smallest semblance of interaction feel necessary. Status report on the new arrival?" he asked, adjusting the medical kit slung over his shoulder. "Subject Carell, female. Species, Draven. Former military rank. Commander of the 3rd Assault Division. Current status, secure. Vital signs, stable, but elevated." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The 3rd Assault Division. They were responsible for the attack on New Sydney Colony. Over 6,000 civilians lost. Among them, his wife Elena and daughter Mira. He had volunteered for this assignment partly to escape those memories. And now they had sent him one of their architects of destruction. "Any specific medical concerns I should be aware of?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Minor lacerations and contusions from the capture operation. Evidence of older combat injuries. Subject appears to be in adequate health for her species." The corridor ended at a reinforced door marked Containment Alpha. Beyond it lay the most secure cells in the facility, reserved for high-value prisoners of war. The war with the Dravens had ended 8 months ago, with humanity's unexpected victory. But the peace remained fragile. Captured enemy combatants were still being processed, studied, and in some cases, used as bargaining chips in ongoing negotiations. Marcus pressed his palm against the scanner, and the heavy door slid open with a pneumatic sigh. The guard station beyond was occupied by a single officer, who nodded at him without looking up from his monitor. "She's in Cell 3, the guard said. "Command wants a full medical workup. They're particularly interested in her genetic profile." "Any particular reason?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. The guard shrugged. "Above my clearance level, but rumor has it they're studying Draven biology for possible military applications." Of course they were. The war might be over on paper, but both sides were preparing for the next conflict. Humanity had won through sheer determination and a few technological breakthroughs. But the Dravens were physically superior, stronger, faster, with enhanced healing capabilities and sensory perception. The temptation to harness those traits would be irresistible to military scientists. "I'll need privacy for the examination," Marcus said. "Medical protocol." "Sure, she's restrained, and there's a panic button by the door if you need it. I'll be monitoring from here." The guard gestured to a bank of screens, showing various angles of each cell. Cell 3 was at the end of another short corridor. As Marcus approached, he caught his first glimpse of the prisoner through the transparent barrier that formed the front wall of the cell. She sat perfectly still on the edge of the narrow cot, her posture rigid despite the visible restraints around her wrists and ankles. Dravens resembled humans in their basic form: bipedal, 2 arms, 1 head, but the similarities ended there. Her skin had a faint bluish undertone, beneath a pattern of fine, pale markings that seemed to shift with her breathing. Her eyes were the most striking feature, large, with no visible whites, just iridescent orbs of deep violet that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Marcus pressed his badge against the security panel, and the transparent barrier became translucent, offering a measure of privacy while remaining impenetrable. A small opening appeared, large enough to pass items through but too small for escape attempts. "I'm Medical Engineer Hale," he said, keeping his voice professionally detached. "I'm here to conduct a medical examination." Carol's gaze fixed on him with unsettling intensity. Dravens didn't blink as often as humans, giving them a predatory appearance that had fueled plenty of xenophobic propaganda during the war. "I know what you are," she replied, her voice carrying the distinctive harmonic quality of her species. Dravens had secondary vocal cords that created a subtle resonance beneath their words. Her command of English was flawless, though colored by the musical cadence of her native speech. "You are here to study me, to take what makes me superior and use it against my people." Marcus unpacked his medical scanner, deliberately avoiding her gaze. "I'm here to assess your health and collect standard biological data. Nothing more." "Your masters want my genetic material," she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "They want to create soldiers with Draven strength, but human loyalty." Marcus finally looked at her directly. "I'm not interested in politics or military applications. I'm a medical professional. Now, please extend your arm through the opening so I can take blood samples." Carell remained motionless, studying him with those unnerving violet eyes. Then, with deliberate slowness, she stood and approached the barrier. She was tall, at least 15 centimeters taller than Marcus, with the lean, powerful build characteristic of her species. As she extended her restrained wrists toward the opening, her gaze locked with his. Something changed in her expression, a subtle shift that Marcus couldn't quite interpret with his limited understanding of Draven facial cues. "Spare me, human," she said softly, her dual-toned voice dropping to little more than a whisper. "I'll give you fierce offspring." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their unexpectedness. Marcus froze, the medical scanner half raised in his hand. "What did you say?" he asked, certain he had misheard. "You understood me," Carell replied, her eyes never leaving his. "I offer you what your scientists want, Draven genetics, but through natural means. A child of both worlds. Spare my life, and I will bear your offspring. They would be formidable warriors, with human intellect and Draven strength." A cold wave of disgust washed over Marcus, followed immediately by anger. This creature, this enemy soldier, was attempting to manipulate him with the most basic biological leverage, treating reproduction as a bargaining chip. And worse, she was offering to create children like Mira, his daughter who had died screaming under Draven bombardment, as weapons. Yet beneath the disgust and anger, something else stirred, not desire or temptation, but a strange, unexpected curiosity. Not about her offer, but about her desperation. This proud warrior, reduced to offering her body as currency for survival. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Do you believe you deserve to live?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her violet eyes widened slightly, the first truly human-like reaction he'd seen from her. "Deserve?" she repeated, as if the concept was foreign to her. "I am a soldier. I do not question whether I deserve life or death. I fight to survive, by whatever means necessary." "That's not what I asked," Marcus said, holding her gaze. "After everything your people, your division, did to mine, do you, Carell, believe you deserve to continue existing in this universe?" For a moment, something flashed across her alien features. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first glimmer of reflection. "What I believe is irrelevant," she finally said. "But I wish to live, and you have the power to help ensure that." Marcus took a slow breath, pushing down the memories threatening to surface, the colony in flames, the desperate messages that had stopped abruptly, the months of not knowing, followed by the brutal confirmation. "Extend your arm," he said flatly. "I need those blood samples." She complied, silently, and he worked with clinical efficiency, taking the required specimens without further conversation. When he finished, he packed his equipment without looking at her again. "Someone will bring you food and water," he said as he prepared to leave. "The full examination will continue tomorrow." "You haven't answered me, human," Carell said behind him, Do we have an arrangement? Marcus paused at the cell entrance, his back to her. My name is Marcus Hale, not human. And no, Commander Carroll, we do not have an arrangement. I'm not interested in creating new life from the ashes of those your people destroyed. He left without looking back, the heavy doors sealing shut behind him. In the silent corridor, he leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how badly his hands were shaking. Are you well, Medical Engineer Hale? Arya's voice inquired from a nearby speaker. Your vital signs indicate distress. I'm fine, he lied, pushing himself upright with effort. Just processing. Shall I schedule a psychological evaluation? Protocol recommends... No, he interrupted. No evaluation, just log that I'll need additional time for tomorrow's examination of the prisoner. As he walked back toward his quarters, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Carell's eyes, not their alien appearance, but the very human desperation he had glimpsed behind them. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror for months after losing his family, the gaze of someone clinging to survival when everything else had been stripped away. Despite himself, he found a question forming in his mind, one he wasn't ready to answer. What would he have done in her position? How far would he go to survive? The thought followed him into uneasy dreams, where violet eyes watched him from the darkness. Morning on Outpost Epsilon was an artificial construct, as the station maintained a constant rotation of lighting to mimic Earth's day-night cycle. Marcus had been awake long before the lights brightened to simulate dawn. Sleep had been elusive, haunted by memories and disturbed by his encounter with the Draven prisoner. He reviewed Carroll's preliminary test results over a tasteless breakfast in the nearly empty mess hall. The data confirmed what was already known about Draven physiology: enhanced musculature, superior oxygen utilization, accelerated healing, but offered no new insights. The genetic analysis would take longer, requiring specialized equipment and expertise. You look terrible, said a voice, interrupting his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see Dr. Eliza Chen sliding into the seat across from him, her own breakfast tray laden with synthesized eggs and toast. As the station's chief medical officer, she was one of the few people on Outpost Epsilon that Marcus considered a friend, though even that relationship remained professional rather than personal. Didn't sleep well, he admitted, pushing the data tablet aside. I heard they brought in a high-ranking Draven yesterday, Eliza said, lowering her voice. And that you're handling her medical assessment. Marcus nodded, taking a sip of his synthetic coffee and grimacing at the bitter taste. Commander Carell, 3rd Assault Division. Eliza's expression softened with understanding. That must be difficult for you, given your history. I'm fine, Marcus said automatically. The same answer he'd given countless times during mandatory psychological evaluations after the loss of his family. Sure you are, Eliza replied, clearly unconvinced. Look, I can take over the assessment if you want. I've got the clearance, and it would be perfectly reasonable to recuse yourself given the personal connection. Marcus considered the offer for a moment. It would be easier to hand over responsibility for Carell to someone else, to avoid facing the embodiment of everything he had lost. But somehow, the thought of walking away felt like surrender. Thanks, but I'll continue, he said. I'm a professional. I can separate my personal history from my duties. Eliza studied him with the careful assessment of an experienced physician. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to acknowledge our limitations. Marcus, there's no shame in that. I know my limitations, he insisted, gathering his tray and standing. And I know what I can handle. As he disposed of his mostly untouched breakfast and headed toward the medical lab, Marcus wondered if he was lying to Eliza or to himself. The truth was, he didn't know if he could handle prolonged contact with Carell, but he felt compelled to try, driven by something he couldn't quite name. The lab was quiet at this early hour, with only a few technicians preparing equipment for the day's work. Marcus reviewed the examination protocol for Karel, noting the extensive tests ordered by Station Command. They wanted a complete physiological profile, stress responses, endurance limits, pain thresholds, cognitive functions. The orders stopped just short of what could be classified as torture, maintaining a thin veneer of scientific inquiry. Marcus modified the protocol, eliminating the more invasive procedures and adding basic comfort measures, adequate hydration, appropriate nutrition for Draven metabolism, pain management for the existing injuries. He knew Command might question his changes, but he was prepared to defend them on medical grounds. There was no scientific value in causing unnecessary suffering. Before heading to the containment wing, he made a detour to the station's small hydroponics garden. Among the carefully tended rows of vegetables and herbs grown to supplement the station's synthetic food supply, he found what he was looking for, a small plant with delicate purple leaves. According to the Xenobotanical database, it was similar to a plant from the Draven homeworld, one that was often used in their traditional medicine for its calming properties. He carefully harvested a few leaves, earning a curious glance from the attending botanist, but no questions. His medical clearance gave him access to any botanical specimens he might need for treatment purposes. When he reached the containment wing, the same guard from yesterday greeted him with a nod. "She's been quiet, hasn't touched her food rations." "Has anyone checked if the rations are compatible with Draven dietary needs?" Marcus asked, already suspecting the answer. The guard shrugged. "Standard prisoner rations, not my department." Marcus sighed internally. Such negligence was typical, not malicious, necessarily, just the product of bureaucratic indifference and lingering wartime attitudes that viewed Dravens as something less than people deserving of basic care. "I'll handle it," he said, adjusting his medical kit to conceal the plant leaves he'd collected. It wasn't strictly prohibited to provide them, but he preferred to avoid unnecessary questions. Karel was standing when he entered, positioned in the center of her cell, as if she had been waiting for him. Her posture was rigid, almost military, despite the restraints that still bound her wrists and ankles. "Medical Engineer Hale," she acknowledged, her dual-toned voice neutral. "Commander Karel," he returned the formal greeting, setting down his equipment and activating the privacy screen. "I notice you haven't eaten. The substances provided are incompatible with my physiology," she stated, without emotion. "They contain compounds toxic to Dravens." Marcus frowned. "Why didn't you alert the staff?" Something like bitter amusement flickered across her alien features. "Would they care if I slowly poisoned myself? It would save resources." The cynicism in her voice struck an uncomfortable chord. She wasn't wrong. Many humans would view the death of a Draven prisoner, particularly one of her rank, with indifference or even satisfaction. "I would care," Marcus said, surprising himself with the admission. "Regardless of what you've done, you're still a living being under my medical care." Karel tilted her head slightly, studying him with those unsettling violet eyes. "Your ethical framework is unexpected. I'll arrange for appropriate nutrition," he said, moving past the moment. "In the meantime, I need to continue your examination. Today's focus is neurological and cognitive assessment." "More data for your weapons programs," she observed flatly. Marcus didn't deny it. They both knew the likely applications of the research. Instead, he unpacked his medical scanner and gestured for her to sit on the examination table. "Before we begin," he said, retrieving a small container from his kit, "I've brought something that might help with your comfort." He opened it to reveal the purple leaves he'd collected. "It's not identical to Valen root from your world, but it has similar properties. It can be steeped in water to make a calming tea." Carol's expression shifted, a barely perceptible widening of her eyes. "You know of Valen?" "I researched Draven physiology and cultural practices after the war," Marcus explained, passing the container through the small opening in the barrier. Medical interest. She accepted the container with careful movements, bringing it close to examine the leaves. During the war, we were told humans saw us only as animals to be exterminated, that you had no interest in understanding our culture or biology, except to better destroy it. Some don't, Marcus acknowledged. Others try to learn, to understand differences without judgment. Which are you, medical engineer Hale? Carell asked, her gaze intense. One who learns to understand, or one who learns to destroy? The question hung between them, deceptively simple yet layered with meaning. Marcus considered his answer carefully. I joined this station to help understand your species, he finally said. My motivations were complicated at first, but I believe knowledge itself isn't evil, only how it's used. A diplomatic answer, Carell observed, but not a complete one. Marcus began setting up the neural monitoring equipment, using the task to avoid her penetrating gaze. Few answers are ever complete, he said, especially in wartime. The war is over, she reminded him. Is it? He countered, looking up to meet her eyes. Or has it just changed form? A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. They both knew the truth. The formal hostilities had ended, but the deeper conflict continued in research labs, diplomatic chambers, and the hearts of those who had lost too much to forgive. Let's proceed with the examination, Marcus said finally, attaching neural sensors to the sides of Carell's head. The Draven remained perfectly still, allowing the procedure without resistance. As the scanner began collecting data, mapping the alien architecture of her brain, Marcus noticed something unexpected. Regions activating that, in humans, would indicate emotional processing rather than cognitive function. What are you thinking about? He asked, curiosity overcoming his professional detachment. Carell was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he had heard before. I was thinking about home, she said. Not the military compound where I spent most of my life, but the ancestral forests of Dravis Prime. I visited once, as a juvenile, before my military training began. The trees there grow tall enough to pierce the clouds, and their roots form cathedral-like spaces beneath the soil. The image was unexpectedly poetic, at odds with the ruthless warrior image that Draven propaganda had cultivated during the war. You miss it, Marcus observed, watching the emotional centers of her brain illuminate the scanner's display. I will never see it again, Carell stated, not answering directly. Even if I were released, those forests were destroyed in the third year of the war. Your people's orbital bombardment turned them to ash. The accusation hung in the air, a reminder of atrocities committed by both sides. Marcus couldn't deny it. Humanity had responded to Draven aggression with escalating force, culminating in environmental devastation that would take centuries to heal. We both lost things that can't be replaced, he said quietly. Carell's gaze sharpened. You speak from personal experience. Marcus hesitated, his professional boundaries warring with a sudden, inexplicable desire to make her understand. New Sydney Colony, he said finally. My wife and daughter were there when your division attacked. Recognition flashed in Carell's eyes, followed by something more complex. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the first seeds of it. The civilian settlement, western continent of Proxima B. Yes, I did not order that attack, she said after a moment. But I participated in its planning. The colony was deemed a strategic threat due to its proximity to our supply lines. It was a research outpost and agricultural settlement, Marcus replied, unable to keep the edge from his voice. There were no military installations within 100 kilometers. That was the intelligence we received, Carell said, her expression unreadable. I did not question it. It was not my place to question. And now, Marcus asked, the scanner forgotten in his hands. Do you question it now? Carell looked down at her restrained hands. Now I have nothing but questions, she admitted, so quietly that Marcus barely heard her. And no answers that matter. The confession, simple as it was, struck Marcus with unexpected force. He recognized in her words the same hollow uncertainty that had plagued him since losing his family. The endless questions that circled like hungry predators, devouring meaning and purpose. The examination will take approximately 2 hours, he said, retreating to professional protocol as a shield against unwanted empathy. Try to remain still for accurate readings. Carell nodded, resuming her perfect stillness as the scanner continued its work. But something had shifted between them, a small crack in the walls that separated enemy from enemy, captor from captive, human from alien. As Marcus recorded the neural data, he found himself wondering about the person behind those violet eyes, not the commander or the prisoner, but the individual who had once walked beneath ancient trees and now sat before him, haunted by questions without answers. For the first time since their encounter began, he saw not just a Draven, but a fellow survivor in a war that had left no one whole. The days following their initial conversations fell into a routine. Marcus would arrive at Carell's cell each morning, conduct the required medical tests, and gradually expand their discussions beyond the clinical necessities. The barrier between them remained, physically in the transparent wall of the cell, and emotionally in the history they carried, but it grew more permeable with each exchange. He learned that Carell had been created, not born, a product of genetic engineering designed specifically for military leadership. She had never known parents, only instructors and commanders. Her earliest memories were of training simulations, not childhood games. We were told from our first conscious moments that humans were the enemy, she explained one day as Marcus recorded her cardiovascular responses. That your species would destroy our civilization if given the opportunity. We believed it was a preemptive war, striking before you could annihilate us. That wasn't true, Marcus said, adjusting the scanner. Before the first Draven attacks, most humans didn't even know your species existed. I understand that now, Carell replied, her voice tinged with something like regret. Our leadership fabricated the threat to unite our fractured society. External enemies are powerful tools for internal control. Human leaders have used the same strategy throughout history, Marcus acknowledged. Fear is an effective motivator. What motivated you? Carell asked suddenly. After your family died, was it fear or hatred? The question caught Marcus off guard. He paused, considering whether to answer or deflect. The professional boundary between them had already blurred, but this felt like crossing into territory he had kept carefully sealed. Both, he finally admitted. At first, I wanted revenge. I volunteered for combat roles, seeking deployment to active zones. I wanted to kill as many Dravens as possible. But you didn't, Carell observed. You became a medical engineer instead. Marcus nodded, his eyes focused on the data display rather than on her. I realized that hate was consuming me, turning me into something I didn't recognize, and it wouldn't bring them back, Elena and Mira. Nothing would. He took a breath. So I chose a different path, using my knowledge to understand, not destroy. Even though that understanding might still be used as a weapon by others. Carell noted. That's the compromise I live with, Marcus said. I can't control how others use knowledge, but I can control my own intentions. Carell was silent for a moment, considering his words. In Draven philosophy, intention is considered secondary to outcome. The path to destruction is paved with noble intentions. And in human philosophy, we believe that without good intentions, even positive outcomes are morally hollow. Marcus countered. Perhaps both perspectives have merit. These philosophical exchanges became a regular part of their interactions, expanding beyond the prescribed examination protocols. Marcus found himself bringing reading materials for Carell, historical texts, scientific journals, even works of human literature. The station's AI noted these unauthorized additions to the prisoner's cell, but, finding no security risk, did not alert higher authorities. Meanwhile, the genetic analysis of Carell's samples proceeded in the main laboratory. Marcus reviewed the preliminary findings with growing concern. Station Command's interest went beyond mere understanding. They were actively seeking to isolate genetic sequences that could be incorporated into human embryos, creating hybrids with Draven physical advantages, but human neural patterns that would ensure loyalty. "They're trying to weaponize reproduction," he confided to Dr. Eliza Chen one evening, in the dimly lit medical office they shared. "It's eugenics, plain and simple." "It's also inevitable," Eliza replied, her voice weary. "The war might be over officially, but no one believes the peace will last. Both sides are preparing for the next conflict." "By creating children designed as weapons," Marcus said, disgust evident in his tone. "How is that different from what the Dravens did with Carell? She was engineered from conception to be a military asset, never given a choice about her own existence." Eliza studied him thoughtfully. "You've developed quite an interest in her perspective. Should I be concerned about your objectivity?" "I'm still objective," Marcus insisted, though the claim felt increasingly hollow. "But spending time with her has complicated the narrative." "Be careful, Marcus," Eliza warned gently. "Understanding is valuable, but empathy can cloud judgment, especially when it comes to someone directly connected to your personal tragedy." "I haven't forgotten what she is," he said, "or what she's done." But as he left the office, Marcus questioned his own assertion. The line between professional interest and personal involvement had blurred, leaving him in uncertain territory. He found himself thinking about Carell outside of their scheduled sessions, wondering about her thoughts, her past, her capacity for change. These reflections followed him to his quarters, where he reviewed the day's neural scans from Carell's examination. The data showed something remarkable, subtle but measurable changes in her brain's emotional processing centers over the weeks of their interactions. The areas associated with empathy, which had shown minimal activity in the initial scans, were gradually becoming more engaged. Was he witnessing neurological evidence of moral development, or merely an adaptive response to captivity, a sophisticated form of mimicry designed to ensure survival? The scientist in him was fascinated. The man who had lost everything to Draven aggression remained cautious. The next morning, his routine visit to Carell's cell was interrupted by the arrival of a new figure, a stern-faced woman in the uniform of Central Command Intelligence. "Officer Hale," she greeted him without warmth. "I'm Director Velez from the Xenogenetic Division. I'll be taking over the examination of Subject Carell, effective immediately." Marcus felt a surge of protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. "On whose authority? I wasn't informed of any transfer of medical responsibility." "Highest level clearance," Velez replied, producing a digital authorization that flashed across Marcus's personal device. "The subject's genetic profile has shown exceptional promise for our hybridization program. We're transferring her to the Central Research Facility on Europa Station." Marcus glanced through the transparent barrier at Carell, who stood motionless, listening to their exchange with an unreadable expression. Europa Station was notorious among the scientific community, a place where ethical constraints were considered secondary to results. "As her primary physician, I advise against transfer at this time," Marcus said, falling back on medical protocol. "The subject is still recovering from injuries sustained during capture, and her psychological adjustment to captivity remains fragile." Velez's expression hardened. "Your advice is noted, Officer Hale, but the decision has been made. Prepare the subject for transport within 48 hours. Full medical documentation is to be transferred to my team immediately." As Velez departed, Marcus stood frozen, torn between professional obligation and a growing sense that he was complicit in something fundamentally wrong. When he finally entered Karel's cell, the Draven's calm facade had cracked, revealing genuine fear beneath. "I know of Europa Station," she said quietly. "No Draven taken there has ever returned." "It's a research facility," Marcus began, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It is a place where beings are unmade," Karel countered, "where minds and bodies are deconstructed to serve your species' ambitions." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I would rather die quickly than suffer that fate." The raw desperation in her tone struck Marcus with physical force. He had seen the reports from Europa Station, clinical language that barely disguised the horror of what happened there. Subjects disassembled for study, neural tissue harvested while still active, reproductive systems extracted and maintained in artificial environments for experimentation. He began, then stopped, uncertain what promise he could make that wouldn't be a lie. "I'll see what I can do," he finally said, the inadequacy of the response painfully evident. Karel's violet eyes held his, searching for something he wasn't sure he could provide. Then, with deliberate movements, she approached the barrier between them, closer than she had ever come before. "Marcus Hale," she said, using his full name for the first time. "I wish to amend my previous offer." He tensed, remembering her initial proposition, to bear his children in exchange for her life. "That's not necessary." "Hear me," she insisted. "I no longer offer this for my survival alone. I have come to believe that our species stand at a crossroads. The path of continued hatred leads to mutual destruction. The alternative—" She hesitated, seeming to struggle with concepts foreign to her military training. "The alternative requires something new, something neither purely human nor purely Draven." "You're talking about a hybrid child," Marcus said, trying to keep the discomfort from his voice. "I am talking about hope," Karel corrected. "Not a weapon to be used by either side, but a bridge between worlds. A child who could understand both perspectives, who could help build lasting peace because they would embody it." Her gaze intensified. "Your scientists seek to create such beings as tools. I offer the possibility of creating one as a person, with parents who would teach them to value both heritages." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, but Marcus shook his head, overwhelmed by the implications. "I can't. I won't create a child from these circumstances, from captivity and desperation. No child should begin their life as a product of such conditions, no matter how noble the intention." Disappointment flickered across Karel's features, but she nodded slowly. "I understand. It would be an unworthy beginning." She withdrew slightly from the barrier. "Then I accept my fate. But I ask one favor, if you are willing." "What favor?" Marcus asked cautiously. "Tell me about your daughter," Karel said softly. "Tell me about Mira. I wish to understand what was lost because of actions I helped set in motion, not as abstract casualties, but as real beings with dreams and loves." The request pierced Marcus to his core, both painful and somehow necessary. No one had asked him about Mira in years. Colleagues avoided the subject out of awkward compassion, and he had stopped volunteering memories to spare himself the grief of recollection. But now, faced with Karel's quiet request, he found himself wanting to speak, to make Mira real again, if only in words. "She was 7, he began, his voice rough with emotion. "She wanted to be a xenobotanist. She collected plants, pressed them between the pages of actual paper books, an ancient technique her grandmother taught her. She had a laugh that could fill a room. And so he talked. For how long he wasn't sure, about Mira's curiosity and Elena's quiet strength, about family meals and bedtime stories and small moments of ordinary joy that had been obliterated in fire from the sky. Carell listened without interruption, her alien features focused with intense concentration, as if committing every detail to memory. When Marcus finally fell silent, emotionally exhausted, Carell spoke a single sentence in the Draven language, a phrase he didn't understand, but recognized from his research as part of their morning ritual. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It is an acknowledgement," Carell explained. "It means, I witness your loss and carry its weight alongside you. It is what we say to honor those who grieve." The gesture, unexpected and profound, broke something open in Marcus, a tightly sealed compartment of rage and pain that he had carried since the day he learned of his family's death. Tears came, unwelcome but unstoppable, and he turned away, struggling to regain his composure. "I apologize if I have caused further distress," Carell said behind him. "No," Marcus managed, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "No, sometimes acknowledgement is what we need most." He took a steadying breath. "Thank you." When he turned back, he found Carell watching him with an expression he couldn't quite identify, something between curiosity and concern, but touched with a deeper emotion that transcended the differences between their species. "I will not let them take you to Europa Station," he said suddenly, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke the words. "I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way." Carell's eyes widened slightly. "Why would you risk yourself for an enemy?" Marcus considered the question, searching for an answer that would make sense to both of them. "Because I've spent the past 4 years letting grief turn into hate, and hate into numbness. Because—" he hesitated, then committed to the truth. "Because I look at you now and I don't see an enemy anymore. I see someone trying to find her way out of darkness, just as I am." The admission hung between them, altering the atmosphere in the small cell. Neither spoke for several moments, acknowledging the shift without needing to define it. Finally, Carell nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "Then we will find this way together." As Marcus left the containment wing, his mind raced with half-formed plans and potential consequences. He was contemplating something that could be classified as treason, interfering with a high-level military directive during an officially sanctioned ceasefire. The penalties would be severe. Yet, for the first time since losing his family, he felt something like purpose stirring within him, not the hollow drive of revenge or the cold comfort of professional detachment, but something warmer and more human, something that felt, against all odds, like hope. The alert came at 300 hours, jolting Marcus from uneasy sleep. Arya's voice filled his quarters, its usual calm delivery edged with urgency. "Security breach in Containment Wing Alpha. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill." Marcus was moving before the announcement finished, grabbing his uniform and medical kit. The station's corridors were bathed in pulsing red emergency lighting as he rushed toward the containment wing, joining the stream of security personnel converging on the sector. His heart pounded with a single thought. Carell. Had someone discovered his plans to prevent her transfer? Or was this something else entirely? The containment wing was in chaos. Alarms blared. Security barriers had engaged at intersection points, and the acrid smell of weapons discharge hung in the air. Through the reinforced observation windows, Marcus could see figures moving in the main corridor. Not the familiar uniforms of station security, but the distinctive armor of Draven combat troops. "How did they get aboard?" he asked a security officer, who was coordinating the response from a protected alcove. "Stealth shuttle," the officer replied grimly. "Masked their approach using our own sensor blind spots. Must have had inside intelligence on our systems." He glanced at Marcus. "They're heading straight for the high security cells. Looks like a targeted extraction." Carell. They had come for her, whether as a rescue or to silence a potential intelligence source. Marcus couldn't be sure. Either way, it placed her directly in the crossfire between Draven extraction forces and station security. "I need to get to Cell 3, Marcus said, pulling his medical credentials. "The prisoner there is under my care." "Negative," the officer responded. "All civilians are to evacuate to safe zones until the situation is contained." "I'm not a civilian. I'm medical staff," Marcus insisted. "If there are injuries, on either side, I need to be there to respond." The officer hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay behind the security team. And for God's sake, don't try to be a hero. These Dravens shoot first and don't bother with questions later." Marcus followed the advancing security team as they moved cautiously through the containment wing, sealing sections behind them to isolate the intruders. The sounds of conflict grew louder, the distinctive high-pitched whine of Draven energy weapons contrasting with the deeper percussion of human projectile firearms. When they reached the central hub of the containment area, Marcus saw the aftermath of the initial confrontation. Two station security officers lay motionless on the floor, their uniforms scorched by energy weapon impacts. Beyond them, a Draven soldier was also down, dark fluid pooling beneath their armored form. "Clear," called the lead security officer after checking the adjoining corridors. "Medical, attend to our personnel." Marcus moved quickly to the fallen officers, but a quick scan confirmed what he already suspected. Their injuries were fatal, the energy weapons having caused catastrophic internal damage. The Draven soldier was similarly beyond help, multiple projectile wounds having penetrated their armor at close range. "They're gone," he reported grimly. "All three." "The intruders are heading for the high-security cells," said a voice over the team's communication system. "They've breached the first security door. Estimated time to Cell 3, 2 minutes. Marcus felt a surge of urgency. He needed to reach Karel before either the Draven extraction team or the station's security forces did. In the chaos of combat, she would be vulnerable, potentially seen as an acceptable loss by both sides. "I'm going ahead to secure the prisoner," he told the security team leader. "Medical priority." Before the officer could object, Marcus was moving, using his medical override to bypass the security barriers between sections. He knew the containment wing's layout better than most. Every corridor, every junction, every emergency access point. While the main forces engaged along the primary routes, he used maintenance passages to approach Cell 3 from an adjacent service area. The sounds of battle grew louder as he neared his destination. Energy discharges and projectile fire echoed through the metal corridors, accompanied by shouted orders in both English and the harsh consonants of the Draven language. When he finally reached the observation area outside Cell 3, Marcus found it momentarily deserted, the security forces engaged with the intruders in the main corridor beyond, buying him precious minutes. Karel was standing at the transparent barrier of her cell, her posture alert, her violet eyes tracking the sounds of combat. When she saw Marcus, surprise flickered across her features. "They've come for you," Marcus said, overriding the cell's security with his medical access code. The transparent barrier slid partially open, not enough for escape, but enough for direct communication without electronic intermediaries. "Yes," Karel confirmed. "A extraction team. I heard them communicating in our battle language. They believe I possess valuable intelligence about human defense systems." "Do you?" Marcus asked, the question escaping before he could consider its implications. A grim smile touched Karel's lips. "Of course. But that is not why they are here." She moved closer to the opening, lowering her voice. "The resistance faction, those who oppose the ceasefire, need symbols to rally around. A captured commander, rescued from human clutches, would serve their narrative." "They're using you," Marcus realized. "As I would once have used them," Karel acknowledged. "War makes tools of us all, Eventually, the sounds of battle grew closer, the Draven team advancing despite station security's resistance. Marcus knew they had only moments before both forces converged on their position. "I can get you out," he said urgently. "There's a maintenance passage that leads to the shuttle bay. If we can reach a medical transport—" "No," Carell interrupted, her voice firm. "I will not go with them." The declaration caught Marcus off guard. "What?" "I will not be used as a symbol for continued conflict," Carell said, her violet eyes intense. "I have seen enough death, caused enough death. I will not enable more." "If you stay, you'll be taken to Europa Station," Marcus reminded her. "You know what that means." "Then I accept that fate," she replied steadily. "Better to end as one than to perpetuate the suffering of many." Before Marcus could respond, the door to the main corridor burst open, admitting 3 figures in the distinctive armored exoskeletons of Draven combat specialists. Their weapons were raised, energy cores glowing with deadly potential. "Stand aside, human," ordered the lead soldier in heavily accented English. "We have come for our commander." Marcus positioned himself between the soldiers and Carell's cell, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "She doesn't want to go with you." The Draven soldiers exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. "She is being coerced," the leader decided. "Move aside or be eliminated." "Wait," Carell called from behind Marcus, switching to the Draven language. The soldiers froze at the sound of her voice, recognizing the distinctive command tone of a superior officer. What followed was a rapid exchange in the Draven tongue, too complex and idiomatic for Marcus to follow completely with his limited knowledge. He caught phrases about honor, duty, and the future of their species, delivered with the intensity of deep conviction. The Draven soldiers seemed increasingly unsettled as Carell spoke, their weapons lowering slightly as her words impacted their resolve. "You dishonor your oath," the leader finally responded in English, allowing Marcus to understand. "You choose humans over your own kind." "I choose life over death," Carell replied, also switching to English. "I choose a future where our children do not inherit our hatreds. Return to our world and tell them that Commander Carell died in human captivity. It will serve your purpose just as well, without further bloodshed." The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats, the Draven soldiers visibly torn between their mission objectives and the direct order from a superior, however compromised she might appear to them. The decision was made for them when station security forces breached the secondary entrance, weapons trained on the Draven squad. "Drop your weapons," ordered the human security chief. "You're surrounded." In the chaos that followed, Marcus was only peripherally aware of the firefight erupting around him. His focus narrowed to Carell, who was shouting something he couldn't hear over the cacophony of energy discharges and projectile fire. He saw her expression change from determination to alarm, her violet eyes widening as she looked past him. He turned just in time to see a Draven soldier, wounded and desperate, raising a weapon toward the human security team. Without conscious thought, Marcus lunged forward, placing himself in the line of fire. The energy discharge caught him in the side, searing through his uniform and into the flesh beneath. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a white-hot brand that drove the air from his lungs and sent him crashing to the floor. Through the haze of agony, he was dimly aware of Carell's voice, no longer speaking, but screaming, first in Draven, then in English. "Hold your fire, all of you, hold your fire!" The authority in her voice cut through the chaos, creating a momentary pause in the conflict. Marcus felt, rather than saw her kneel beside him, her restrained hands awkwardly trying to assess his wound. "Marcus," she said, his name in her dual-toned voice carrying a weight of emotion he had never heard before. "Marcus, stay conscious. The energy pulse has cauterized the external wound, but there is internal damage." He tried to respond, but could only manage a pained grimace. Around them, the firefight had indeed paused, both sides watching the unexpected tableau of a Draven commander tending to a wounded human. "He needs immediate medical attention," Karel announced, addressing both groups. "This man has shown compassion to an enemy. Will none of you show the same?" The impasse broke when Dr. Eliza Chen pushed through the security cordon, medical kit in hand. "Let me through," she demanded. "I'm a doctor." Karel moved aside, allowing Eliza access to Marcus's injury. As consciousness began to fade, Marcus heard the Draven commander continuing to speak, not in the harsh battle language of her people, but in the measured tones of diplomacy. "Enough blood has been shed," she was saying. "On both sides. I will return to my cell voluntarily. I will provide no intelligence to either faction that could escalate this conflict. In exchange, I ask only that this man receives the care he needs, and that both sides consider the cost of continuing down this path of mutual destruction." It was, Marcus realized as darkness claimed his vision, the voice, not of a warrior bred for combat, but of a leader bred for something greater, the preservation of life itself. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness was Karel using his name once more, not as a designation or a title, but as something precious and individual. "Live, Marcus Hale," she whispered. "There is still much to build from these ashes." Consciousness returned gradually, arriving in fragments of sensation, the sterile smell of the medical bay, the rhythmic beep of monitoring equipment, the dull throb of healing tissue. Marcus opened his eyes to the familiar sight of the station's medical ceiling, its panels designed with subtle patterns, meant to be calming to recovering patients. "Welcome back," said a voice beside him. Dr. Eliza Chen moved into his field of vision, her expression a mixture of professional assessment and personal relief. "You've been unconscious for 4 days." Marcus tried to speak, found his throat dry, and accepted the water Eliza offered through a straw. After a few sips, he managed a single word. "Karel." Eliza's expression grew guarded. "She's alive. After the incident, she voluntarily returned to custody. The Draven extraction team was captured. 2 killed. 1 wounded, but stable." "And station personnel?" Marcus asked, dreading the answer. 3 dead. 5 wounded, including you," Eliza reported grimly. "It could have been much worse if the firefight had continued." She paused, studying him with professional curiosity. "The Draven commander, she refused to leave with her people, and she was rather insistent about your medical care. Quite unusual behavior for a prisoner of war." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, relief washing through him. Karel was alive, and she had chosen to stay rather than escape with her people. The significance of that decision wasn't lost on him. "I need to see her," he said, attempting to sit up and immediately regretting it as pain lanced through his side. "Not so fast," Eliza cautioned, gently but firmly pressing him back onto the bed. "That energy weapon did significant damage to your internal organs. The regenerative treatment is working, but you need at least another week of recovery before you're cleared for duty." "Eliza," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. "They're planning to transfer her to Europa Station. You know what happens there." The doctor's expression softened with understanding. "I know, but the transfer has been temporarily delayed following the incident. Command is reassessing the security protocols for high-value prisoners." "That won't last long," Marcus insisted. "Once they've upgraded security, they'll move forward with the transfer. I need to talk to Command, make them understand." "Understand what, exactly?" Eliza interrupted, her tone gentle but probing. "That you've developed feelings for a prisoner under your care? A Draven commander who, by her own admission, helped plan attacks on civilian targets?" The question struck Marcus silent. Had he developed feelings for Karel? The relationship had certainly evolved beyond professional detachment, but he hadn't allowed himself to examine the nature of that evolution too closely. "It's not that simple," he finally said. She's changing, Eliza. I've seen it in her neural scans, in her behavior. She chose to stay rather than escape. She's questioning everything she was created to be. Or she's manipulating you, Eliza suggested, though without conviction. Adapting her strategy to ensure survival. No, Marcus said with unexpected certainty. I've spent enough time with her to recognize sincerity. She wants something different, not just for herself, but for both our species. Eliza sighed, seemingly weighing her next words carefully. Marcus, I've known you for years. I've watched you struggle with grief and anger after losing Elena and Mira. I understand the need to find meaning in that loss, to believe that something good can come from so much pain. She took his hand, her expression compassionate. But are you sure you're seeing Carell clearly, and not just projecting your own need for redemption? The question was fair, and Marcus considered it honestly. Was his perception of Carell clouded by his own emotional needs? Was he seeing change where there was only calculation? I don't know, he admitted finally. But I do know that if we send her to Europa Station, we're choosing to continue the cycle of dehumanization that fueled this war in the first place. And I can't be part of that decision. Not anymore. Eliza studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. All right. I can't get you access to Carell yet. Command has restricted all personnel contact pending their investigation of the incident. But I can bring you updates on her condition. And maybe, she hesitated, maybe I can arrange for a message to be delivered. Thank you, Marcus said, genuine gratitude in his voice. That would help. As Eliza prepared to leave, she paused at the door. What happened in that corridor? Marcus? The security footage shows you stepping in front of that weapon deliberately. Marcus considered the question, searching for an answer that would make sense even to himself. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. It wasn't a calculated decision. I just couldn't watch any more death. Not hers. Not the security teams. Not even the Draven soldiers. Eliza nodded slowly. Get some rest. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Left alone. Marcus stared at the ceiling, his thoughts circling around Carell. Her choice to remain in captivity. Her intervention that had likely saved multiple lives. The way she had said his name in those final moments before unconsciousness claimed him. Something was changing between them. Something neither of them had anticipated or sought. Whether it was the beginning of healing or merely a different kind of wound, he couldn't yet say. The week of recovery passed with excruciating slowness. Marcus's physical condition improved steadily, thanks to the advanced regenerative treatments. But his mental state grew increasingly restless. Through Eliza, he learned that Carell had been moved to a higher security cell following the incident, with even more restricted access. The transfer to Europa Station had been rescheduled for the following month, pending completion of the incident investigation. Eliza had managed to deliver a brief message to Carell, informing her of Marcus's recovery, and had returned with an equally brief response. I am grateful for your survival. Continue to heal. There is much yet to be done. The cryptic nature of the message left Marcus both reassured and frustrated. He needed to see her, to continue the conversation that had been violently interrupted, to understand what she had meant by refusing extraction. When he was finally cleared to return to limited duty, the first thing he did was file a formal request to resume his medical supervision of prisoner Carell. The request was denied within hours, with a terse note indicating that all prisoner interactions were now limited to security personnel and a newly assigned medical team from Central Command. Undeterred, Marcus sought out Dr. Morris, the xenobiologist who had taken over Carell's medical care. He found the man in the station's main laboratory, reviewing data that Marcus immediately recognized as Carell's genetic sequencing. Officer Hale. Dr. Morris greeted him with professional courtesy, but obvious wariness. I was told you might try to contact me. Command was quite clear that you're to have no further involvement with the Draven prisoner. I understand the official position, Marcus replied carefully. But as the physician who's spent the most time with her, I have insights into her physiology and psychology that could be valuable to your team. Morris glanced around the lab, then lowered his voice. Look, I sympathize with your position. I've reviewed your medical notes. Thorough work, by the way. But this comes from the highest levels. The prisoner is considered extremely valuable and extremely dangerous. After the extraction attempt, Command isn't taking any chances. How is she? Marcus asked, abandoning pretense. Physically, mentally. Morris hesitated. Professional ethics warring with Command directives. She's cooperative, he finally said. Unusually so, according to the security team. She's following all protocols, answering questions when asked, though she's selective about what information she provides. Physically, she's in good health, though she's requested permission to cultivate some plants in her cell. Odd request for a military commander. Not so odd, Marcus said, a small smile touching his lips. She's developed an interest in botany during her time here. Did you approve the request? Within limits, Morris admitted. Nothing toxic or that could be weaponized. Just some basic flora from the station's hydroponics garden. He gave Marcus a curious look. She specifically asked for a cutting from the purple-leafed plant you brought her earlier. Said it helped her focus. The reference to the Valen-like plant, their first moment of genuine connection, sent an unexpected warmth through Marcus. She's learning to appreciate beauty beyond functionality, he observed. That's significant progress for someone engineered for warfare. Morris looked uncomfortable. Officer Hale, I shouldn't be discussing this with you at all. If Command finds out. I understand, Marcus assured him. I won't put you in a difficult position. Just take good care of her. She's more than what they created her to be. As he turned to leave, Morris called after him quietly. She asks about you. Every day during the medical check. Wants to know how your recovery is progressing. He paused. I've never seen a Draven express concern for a human before. It's unusual. The information stayed with Marcus as he returned to his own duties, now reassigned to the General Medical Bay, rather than the specialized containment wing. The knowledge that K-Rel continued to think of him, to ask after his well-being, strengthened his resolve to find a way to see her before the transfer to Europa Station. His opportunity came 3 days later, when an equipment malfunction in the containment wing's environmental systems triggered an emergency response. As one of the senior medical officers with experience in the wing's layout, Marcus was included in the response team dispatched to ensure prisoner welfare during the repairs. The malfunction had affected the atmospheric regulation in several cells, including Carell's. As Marcus entered the containment wing with the response team, he kept his expression professionally neutral, despite the anticipation building within him. The security protocols had been temporarily modified to accommodate the emergency, allowing medical personnel limited access to affected areas. Marcus used this authorization to approach Carell's cell, medical scanner in hand, as a pretext for assessing her condition. When he finally saw her through the transparent barrier, the change in her environment was immediately apparent. The formerly stark cell had been transformed by the presence of several small plants arranged near the light panel. Their greenery and occasional blooms added unexpected color to the sterile space. But more striking was the change in Carell herself. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside the plants, a data tablet in her hands, apparently engaged in reading. Her posture was relaxed rather than military rigid, and she wore the simplified prisoner garments with a dignity that transcended their utilitarian design. The violet eyes that had once seemed so alien now looked up at his approach with an expression he could clearly recognize. Relief. Medical Engineer Hale, she acknowledged, using his formal title for the benefit of the security monitors. Have you come to assess the environmental malfunction? Yes, Marcus replied, equally formal. We need to ensure no physiological damage has occurred due to the fluctuations in oxygen content. He activated his scanner, using it as cover to speak more personally. You look well. The plants are thriving. They require minimal care but provide significant psychological benefit. Carell responded, a hint of a smile touching her lips. I have been studying Earth's botanical history. The relationship between your species and plants is complex and beautiful. Marcus noted the security guard at the end of the corridor, keeping a watchful eye, but maintaining enough distance to allow standard medical interaction. We don't have much time, he said quietly. They're transferring you to Europa Station in 3 weeks. Carell nodded, unsurprised. I am aware. The preparations have already begun. I'm trying to find a way to prevent it, Marcus told her, adjusting the scanner to display normal readings, regardless of the actual data. But Command has restricted my access to you, and my influence is limited. Do not endanger yourself further on my behalf, Carell said, her voice soft but firm. You have already risked too much. I can't let them take you there, Marcus insisted. Not after everything that's happened. Carell rose and approached the barrier, close enough that he could see the fine patterns on her skin shifting with her breathing. Marcus, she said, using his personal name despite the surveillance. I have had time to reflect in this solitude, to consider the path that brought me here and the possible paths ahead. She gestured to the data tablet she had been reading. Your literature has been illuminating, particularly the philosophical texts on redemption and second chances. I find myself drawn to the concept of atonement, of acknowledging past wrongs and seeking to balance them with future goods. That's a very human concept, Marcus observed. Perhaps, Carell acknowledged. Or perhaps it is simply the natural evolution of any thinking being who has participated in destruction and lived long enough to witness the consequences. She glanced at the plants growing along the edge of her cell. I requested permission to cultivate these, not merely for aesthetic purposes, but as a symbolic act, to create rather than destroy, to nurture rather than harm. Her violet eyes returned to his. It is a small beginning, but it is mine, chosen, not programmed. The profound simplicity of her statement struck Marcus deeply. She was describing not just personal growth, but the emergence of true moral agency, something her creators had never intended her to develop. I want to help you continue that beginning, he said. Europa Station would end it permanently. Perhaps, Carell said again. Or perhaps it would simply transform it into something different, something beyond my current understanding. She placed her hand against the transparent barrier. I have learned that endings and beginnings are often the same moment viewed from different perspectives. Marcus found himself mirroring her gesture, his palm aligning with hers on the opposite side of the barrier. That sounds like resignation. I didn't think Draven commanders surrendered so easily. A genuine smile touched Carell's lips, a rare expression that transformed her alien features into something unexpectedly beautiful. Not resignation, Marcus Hale, adaptation, the fundamental skill of any successful organism. Her expression grew more serious. But I would ask one thing of you, if you are willing. Name it, Marcus said without hesitation. Continue what we have begun here, Carell requested. The dialogue between our kinds, the search for understanding beyond conflict. Whether I remain here or am taken elsewhere, that work must continue. Before Marcus could respond, the security guard at the end of the corridor began moving toward them, indicating that his allotted time was ending. I have to go, he said, reluctantly lowering his hand from the barrier. But this isn't over. I'll find a way to reach you again before the transfer. As he turned to leave, Carell called after him softly. Marcus, the plant you brought me, the one resembling Valen root. It has begun to flower. I did not know it could do that in captivity. The simple observation, laden with metaphorical significance, stayed with Marcus as he left the containment wing. A plant, flowering in captivity. A warrior discovering compassion in confinement. Both finding ways to grow beyond the limitations of their environments. It was, perhaps, the most profound act of resistance imaginable. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity, as Marcus pursued every available avenue to prevent Carol's transfer. He filed formal appeals citing medical concerns, requested review of her case based on her cooperation during the extraction incident, and even attempted to contact members of the diplomatic corps who were working on the fragile peace agreement with the Draven government. Each effort met with official rejection or bureaucratic delays designed to run out the clock until the transfer date. As his options dwindled, Marcus found himself contemplating more desperate measures, including the possibility of helping Carol escape, despite her expressed unwillingness to flee. It was Eliza who finally provided an unexpected direction. There might be another way, she told him during a rare private moment in the medical office they once shared. Not to prevent the transfer entirely, but to alter its nature. Marcus looked up from the latest rejection notice, hope kindling despite his exhaustion. What do you mean? Europa Station isn't just a military research facility, Eliza explained. It also houses a small civilian scientific division focused on xenobiological conservation. They maintain protected habitats for endangered species from various worlds affected by the war. And, Marcus prompted, not yet seeing the connection. And they've recently expanded to include a cultural preservation initiative, documenting and maintaining the traditions, languages, and knowledge of species whose populations have been severely reduced by the conflict. Eliza leaned forward, lowering her voice. Including Dravens. Understanding began to dawn. You're suggesting we try to get Carel reassigned to the Conservation Division, rather than military research? Eliza nodded. It would still mean transfer to Europa Station, but under very different conditions. Conservation personnel are treated as cultural resources, not experimental subjects. They have limited freedom within their assigned areas, access to educational materials, even communication privileges with their homeworlds. How would we arrange such a reassignment? Marcus asked, mind already racing with possibilities. Command has made it clear they want her genetic material for the hybridization program. That's where it gets complicated, Eliza admitted. We would need to prove that Carel possesses unique cultural or scientific knowledge that makes her more valuable as an intact resource than as genetic material. Marcus considered this, remembering conversations with Carel about Draven philosophy, their ancient forests, the cultural practices that had been nearly lost during the war. She does possess such knowledge. She's one of the few remaining Dravens who visited their ancestral forests before they were destroyed. She knows their traditional ceremonies, their philosophical systems. That might not be enough, Eliza cautioned. The military could argue they can extract that information through interrogation without preserving her as a living resource. Marcus fell silent, weighing options and discarding them just as quickly. Then a memory surfaced, Carel tending the plants in her cell. Speaking of creation rather than destruction, what if we could demonstrate that she's developing something new, he suggested slowly. Not just preserving old knowledge, but creating a synthesis of Draven and human understanding, something that could only exist through her continued conscious engagement. Eliza looked skeptical. Like what? I don't know exactly, Marcus admitted. But she's been studying human literature, philosophy, even botany. She's finding connections between our worlds that no one else has explored. If we could document that process, show that it has scientific or cultural value. It's a long shot, Eliza warned. But possibly our only shot at this point? She glanced at the time display. The transfer is scheduled in 9 days. We need to move quickly if we're going to build a case. Marcus nodded, renewed determination replacing his earlier despair. I need to see her again, to explain the plan and gather evidence of her cultural knowledge. I can't get you official access, Eliza said. But, she hesitated, then made a decision. Dr. Morris owes me a favor. He's scheduled to perform Carol's final medical assessment before transfer. I might be able to convince him to request your assistance, given your experience with Draven physiology. Do it, Marcus urged. And in the meantime, I'll start preparing the formal request for reassignment to the Conservation Division. As Eliza left to contact Dr. Morris, Marcus turned to his data terminal and began composing the most important document of his career, one that might determine not just Carell's fate, but potentially the future relationship between their species. The opportunity to see Carell came 3 days later, when Dr. Morris reluctantly agreed to include Marcus in the final pre-transfer assessment. The examination would take place in the medical bay rather than Carell's cell, providing a rare chance for interaction outside the constraints of the containment wing. When security personnel escorted Carell into the medical bay, Marcus was struck by the dignity with which she carried herself despite the restraints on her wrists and ankles. Her violet eyes found his immediately, a flash of recognition and something warmer passing between them before she composed her features into neutral attentiveness. This is Medical Engineer Hale, Dr. Morris explained to the security detail. He has specialized experience with Draven physiology and will assist with the assessment. The guards nodded without particular interest, taking positions near the door while maintaining a clear view of the prisoner. Morris began the examination with standard procedures, vital signs, reflexes, basic cognitive tests, while Marcus prepared the more specialized equipment. I'll need to conduct a neural response assessment, Marcus announced, after the preliminary tests were complete. It requires reducing external stimuli. Could we dim the lights, please? Morris gave him a questioning look but complied, lowering the illumination in the examination area. The reduced lighting provided a small measure of privacy, though the guards remained vigilant at their posts. As Marcus attached the neural sensors to Carell's temples, he spoke quietly, his voice masked by the hum of the equipment. We're trying to get you reassigned to the Conservation Division at Europa Station. Better conditions. Potential for future release. Carell's expression remained neutral, but her eyes conveyed understanding. What do you need from me? She asked, her dual-toned voice equally soft. Evidence of unique cultural knowledge, Marcus explained, as he adjusted the sensors. Anything that makes you more valuable as a living cultural resource than as genetic material. A subtle nod. I understand. Marcus activated the neural scanner, which displayed Carell's brain activity on a monitor visible to all present. I'm going to ask you some standard questions to establish baseline responses, he announced more loudly. Please answer honestly and completely. What followed was ostensibly a routine cognitive assessment, but Marcus carefully crafted his questions to allow Carell to demonstrate her extensive knowledge of Draven cultural heritage, philosophy, and artistic traditions, information that would be recorded as part of the official examination and could later be used to support the reassignment request. Carell responded with detailed descriptions of pre-war Draven ceremonies, intricate explanations of their philosophical systems, and even recitations of ancient poetry in her native language. The neural scanner recorded the complex patterns of her brain activity as she accessed these cultural memories, providing scientific evidence of her value as a living repository of knowledge. Fascinating, Dr. Morris commented, genuinely impressed by the depth of information being revealed. I had no idea Draven culture was so sophisticated. Most humans don't, Marcus agreed, giving Carell an encouraging nod. We've been so focused on their military capabilities that we've overlooked their cultural achievements. As the examination continued, Marcus guided the conversation toward Carell's more recent studies of human literature and philosophy, allowing her to demonstrate the unique synthesis of perspectives she was developing, the very thing that might convince authorities of her value as a living resource rather than mere genetic material. I have observed parallels between the ancient Draven concept of Soraven, the balance of opposing forces, and human philosophical traditions, such as Taoism. Carell explained, her voice taking on the cadence of a scholar rather than a soldier. Both recognize the necessity of complementary opposition, what humans might call harmony through difference. Where Draven military doctrine perverted this concept to justify conquest, the original philosophy teaches that true strength comes from the balanced integration of unlike elements. The neural scanner displayed complex activity patterns as she spoke, evidence of sophisticated conceptual thinking that transcended basic memory recall. Dr. Morris watched with increasing interest, clearly surprised by the depth of Carell's analysis. And how do you see this philosophical concept applying to the current situation between our species? Marcus asked, knowing the question would allow her to demonstrate her unique perspective. Carell considered for a moment, her violet eyes thoughtful. The war has created extreme imbalance, too much destruction without creation, too much taking without giving. Both our species now stand at a critical juncture where we must find a new equilibrium or risk mutual annihilation. She glanced at the small plants, visible through the observation window of her cell across the corridor. I have been exploring the symbolic significance of cultivation as a path toward this balance. The act of nurturing life requires patience, care, and acceptance of natural processes beyond our control, qualities that warfare systematically eliminates. Dr. Morris was now openly fascinated. And you've developed these perspectives during your time here? Through your reading and gardening? Yes, Carell confirmed. Though I would not have been receptive to these ideas without the initial catalyst of conversations with medical engineer Hale. Our exchanges created a context for reconsidering fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence and the relationship between different forms of life. Marcus carefully maintained his professional demeanor, despite the personal reference. The examination continued for another hour, with Carell demonstrating not just knowledge, but genuine insight that clearly impressed even the skeptical Dr. Morris. By the time the session concluded, Marcus was confident they had recorded sufficient evidence to support the reassignment request. As security prepared to return Carell to her cell, she paused, looking directly at Marcus. There is one more thing I believe should be documented, she said formally. With your permission, I would like to share a recent creative endeavor. Morris glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Go ahead, the doctor said. Carell extended her restrained hands, revealing a small object she had been holding, a folded piece of paper, apparently given to her as part of her authorized reading materials. With careful movements, she unfolded it to reveal a drawing created with what appeared to be plant pigments. The image was simple, yet striking. A childlike figure with features that blended human and Draven characteristics, standing between stylized representations of both worlds. Above the figure was written, in both English and Draven script, neither enemy nor ally, but something new. I have been contemplating the future, Carell explained, as Morris examined the drawing. Not merely my own, but that of both our species. If there is to be lasting peace, it cannot come from conquest or even compromise alone. It must emerge from a genuine integration of perspectives, a new way of seeing that transcends the limitations of both. The drawing was scanned and added to the examination record before security escorted Carell back to her cell. As they departed, she cast one final glance at Marcus, a look that contained both gratitude and something deeper, a connection that defied the barriers between them. That was unexpected, Dr. Morris commented when they were alone. I've examined dozens of Draven prisoners, and I've never encountered anything like this. She's different." "Yes," Marcus agreed simply. "She is." "Your request for reassignment to the Conservation Division," Morris said, lowering his voice despite the empty room. "I think I understand it better now. This isn't just about saving one prisoner from experimentation, is it?" Marcus met the other doctor's gaze steadily. "No. It's about preserving the possibility of something new, something neither side has imagined yet." Morris nodded slowly. "I'll support your request. I can't guarantee it will succeed, but my report will emphasize the unique nature of her cultural knowledge and developing perspectives." "Thank you," Marcus said, genuine relief in his voice. That could make all the difference. As he left the medical bay, Marcus felt a cautious optimism beginning to replace the desperation of recent weeks. They had made their case as strongly as possible. Now all they could do was wait for Command's decision. The response came faster than expected. Just 2 days after submitting the formal request for Cairyl's reassignment, Marcus received notification of a special hearing before Station Commander Ramsey and a representative from Central Command Intelligence. This could be good or very bad, Eliza warned as they prepared for the hearing. They might be seriously considering the reassignment, or they might be investigating your unauthorized interactions with the prisoner. "Either way, it's our only chance," Marcus replied, straightening his uniform with uncharacteristic attention to detail. "If they're suspicious, I'll take full responsibility. Your involvement stays confidential." Eliza shook her head firmly. "We're in this together. Cayryl isn't just your project anymore. I've reviewed the examination recordings. What she's developing goes beyond individual significance. It could be important for the future of human-Draven relations." The hearing room was austere, its furnishings limited to a single table, where Commander Ramsey sat alongside a stern-faced woman, introduced as Director Velez, the same intelligence officer who had initially ordered Cayryl's transfer to Europa Station. To Marcus's surprise, Cayryl herself was present, seated in a specially designed restraint chair that accommodated her taller Draven frame, while ensuring she remained secure. "Medical Engineer Hale," Commander Ramsey began without preamble. "Your request for the reassignment of prisoner Cayryl to the Conservation Division of Europa Station has been reviewed by both Station Command and Central Intelligence. Before rendering a decision, we have some questions." "Of course, Commander," Marcus replied, maintaining a professional demeanor, despite his awareness of Cayryl's presence just meters away. Director Velez leaned forward, her gaze penetrating. "Engineer Hale, your request cites the prisoner's unique cultural knowledge and evolving synthesis of Draven and human perspectives as justification for reassignment. Yet our records indicate that your official contact with the prisoner ended weeks ago following the extraction incident. How did you obtain the information in your request?" The direct question confirmed Eliza's concern. They were investigating his unauthorized interactions with Cayryl. Marcus had prepared for this, knowing that honesty, within limits, was his best approach. "I participated in the prisoner's final medical assessment at Dr. Morris's request, given my specialized knowledge of Draven physiology," he explained. "During that examination, the prisoner demonstrated extensive cultural knowledge and philosophical insights that were recorded as part of the official assessment." "Convenient timing," Velez observed dryly. "And your personal interest in this prisoner's welfare. How do you explain that?" Marcus felt Cayryl's violet eyes on him, but kept his focus on the director. "My interest is professional, not personal. As a medical practitioner, I believe in ethical treatment of all beings under my care, regardless of species or past actions. The prisoner has demonstrated significant psychological evolution during her captivity, evolution that has scientific and potentially diplomatic value." "And this has nothing to do with your family's death at Draven hands?" Commander Ramsey asked, his tone softening slightly. Your history is well documented. Engineer Hale, many would expect you to harbor resentment, not advocate for a Draven commander's welfare. The question struck at the heart of Marcus's motivation, forcing him to confront complexities he had only partially acknowledged to himself. He allowed himself a brief glance at Karel before responding. My family's death is precisely why this matters. Commander, he said quietly, but firmly. I have seen where hatred leads, on both sides. The cycle of vengeance has cost millions of lives across dozens of worlds. At some point, someone has to choose a different path. A heavy silence followed his words. Then, unexpectedly, Karel spoke. If I may address the panel, she said, her dual-toned voice formal but clear. Director Velas frowned, but Commander Ramsey nodded permission after a moment's consideration. I do not seek special treatment for myself, Karel stated. I acknowledge my role in actions that caused immense suffering to human populations. In Draven justice tradition, such acknowledgement is the first step toward Tavener, the path of balancing harm with healing. She straightened in the restraint chair, her posture dignified despite her confined state. What medical engineer Hale proposes is not merely mercy for one prisoner, but an opportunity to preserve knowledge that could help prevent future conflicts. I have had time to study human history during my captivity. I have observed that your species has a remarkable capacity for both destruction and reconciliation. This duality exists in Draven nature as well, though our military regime suppressed the latter in favor of the former. Her violet eyes moved between the two human officials. I offer neither excuses nor pleas for myself. I offer only the observation that in the space between our species, in the understanding of our differences and similarities, lies the possibility of something neither of us has achieved alone: lasting peace. The simple eloquence of her statement hung in the air, commanding a respect that transcended species boundaries. Marcus felt a surge of pride, not for his own influence on her evolution, but for the extraordinary being she was revealing herself to be. Commander Ramsey exchanged a long look with Director Velas, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, the commander addressed Marcus directly. Engineer Hale, you understand that if this reassignment is approved, you will have no further contact with the prisoner? The Conservation Division operates under strict protocols regarding external communications. The implication was clear. They were considering the request, but at the cost of any future interaction between Marcus and Karel. He had known this was likely, had prepared himself for it, but the reality still struck with unexpected force. I understand, Commander, he replied steadily. The prisoner's welfare and the potential value of her knowledge take precedence over any individual relationship. Director Velas studied him with clinical detachment. And if the request is denied, what then, Engineer Hale? The question carried a subtle warning, a reminder that his advocacy had boundaries beyond which lay serious consequences. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. Then I will continue my duties as assigned, Director. But I will also continue to believe that we are making a mistake, not just regarding this prisoner, but regarding our approach to post-war relations with the Draven species. The director's expression remained impassive, but something like reluctant respect flickered briefly in her eyes. Your conviction is noted. She turned to Commander Ramsey. I believe we have sufficient information to render a decision. The commander nodded. Engineer Hale, Dr. Chen, you are dismissed. You will be notified of our decision within 24 hours. As they were escorted from the hearing room, Marcus allowed himself one final glance at Karel. She met his eyes with quiet intensity, communicating volumes without words. Whatever happened next, something profound and irreversible had passed between them, a connection that transcended the categories of ally and enemy, human and alien. It was, as she had drawn in her simple yet powerful image, something new. The notification arrived precisely 24 hours later. A formal communication from Station Command appearing on Marcus's data terminal with the sterile efficiency of bureaucracy. He opened it with steady hands, prepared for either outcome. Request approved with conditions. Read the header in bold text. Relief washed through him, so powerful that he had to sit down. He scanned the document quickly, absorbing the key points. Carell would be transferred to the Conservation Division of Europa Station, rather than the Military Research Wing. She would be classified as a cultural resource subject, rather than an experimental subject, with all the protections that designation entailed. She would have limited freedom within the division's facilities, access to educational materials, and the opportunity to document Draven cultural knowledge for preservation purposes. The conditions were equally clear. She would remain in custody indefinitely. She would have no communication with any personnel from Outpost Epsilon, including medical engineer Marcus Hale. Her activities would be continuously monitored for security purposes, and any violation of Conservation Division protocols would result in immediate reclassification and transfer to military research. Marcus read the document a second time, then a third, assuring himself that he had understood correctly. They had succeeded in their primary goal. Carell would be spared the fate awaiting her in military experimentation. She would have the chance to continue her personal evolution, to preserve what she knew of her culture, perhaps even to develop further the synthesis of perspectives she had begun. But the cost was separation, complete and indefinite. He was still absorbing this reality when Eliza appeared at his office door, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "You've seen the decision?" Marcus nodded, gesturing to the screen. "We succeeded, mostly. The no-contact provision isn't surprising," Eliza said gently, taking the seat across from him. "They're concerned about your influence on her, and possibly hers on you." "I know," Marcus acknowledged. "And I can accept it, knowing she'll be treated as a person, rather than an experiment." He managed a small smile. "It's more than I hoped for, honestly." "There's more," Eliza said, sliding a small data chip across the desk. "Dr. Morris asked me to give you this. It's not officially part of Carell's medical record, but he thought you should have it." Marcus picked up the chip curiously. "What is it?" "A recording from her cell after she was informed of the decision. It wasn't included in the official communications because it was deemed personal rather than procedural." Marcus inserted the chip into his terminal. The screen displayed a simple video feed from Carell's cell, time-stamped just 2 hours earlier. She sat beside her small collection of plants, apparently speaking to them as she tended their leaves. But the audio revealed she was speaking to someone else entirely. "I do not know if these words will reach you," Marcus Hale, her dual-toned voice, said softly. "But I speak them nonetheless, trusting that in some form they may find their way to you." She gently touched one of the purple-leafed plants, the one resembling Valen root that he had brought her so many weeks ago. "You once gave me this as a gesture of understanding. It has flourished in conditions where it should not have been able to grow. It has even flowered, something the xenobotanists tell me is highly unusual in captivity." Carell looked directly at the camera then, as if she knew she was being recorded and hoped Marcus would see the footage. "I believe there is a lesson in this. Life finds ways to adapt, to transform, to create beauty even in the most constrained circumstances. This is what you have helped me understand, not through instruction, but through example." She carefully plucked one of the small purple flowers from the plant and placed it between the pages of a book, one of the philosophical texts Marcus had provided early in their interactions. In Draven tradition, preserved flowers symbolize moments of transformation, experiences that change the course of one's existence. This moment, this transition, qualifies as such. Her violet eyes remained fixed on the camera, intense and direct. "Whatever comes next, know this. what began between us, this exploration of understanding across the boundaries of species and history, will continue, if not through direct communication, then through the ideas we have shared and the perspectives we have exchanged. She closed the book gently, securing the flower within its pages. There is a human concept I have been contemplating: legacy. It refers to what remains after a being is gone, what continues to influence the future. Our legacy, Marcus Hale, will not be what was destroyed in war, but what was created in its aftermath. Not a child of flesh, but something equally real, a new way of seeing that neither of us could have developed alone. The recording ended with Carell returning to her plants, a quiet dignity in her movements that spoke of acceptance without surrender, of peace without defeat. Marcus sat in silence for a long moment after the screen went dark, aware of Eliza's compassionate presence, but unable to immediately find words for what he felt. It was a complex emotion, grief at the impending separation, but also a profound satisfaction that transcended personal loss. Carell had captured it perfectly. They had created something together that would outlast their brief connection, something with the potential to influence the future in ways neither of them might live to see. "She's right, you know," Eliza said softly. "What happened between you two? It matters beyond the personal. It's proof that genuine understanding is possible, even after the worst kind of conflict." Marcus nodded, finding his voice at last. "I need to send her something before the transfer. A response. An acknowledgement. Something." "The transfer is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Eliza reminded him. "And direct communication has been prohibited." "Not direct communication," Marcus clarified. "Just a symbol, like her flower." Understanding dawned in Eliza's eyes. "I might be able to arrange that. What did you have in mind?" The next morning, as Carell was escorted from her cell for the final time, preparing for transfer to the shuttle that would take her to Europa Station, she found a small package waiting on the transport gurney. The security officer, following Dr. Chen's instructions, had placed it there as part of the prisoner's authorized personal effects. With careful movements, Carell opened the package to reveal a small, clear container. Inside was a seed, one she recognized from her botanical studies as belonging to an Earth species known for its resilience and adaptability. Alongside it was a tiny vial of soil, labeled in precise handwriting, "From New Sydney Colony, for new beginnings." The symbolism was unmistakable. Life emerging from the very place where so much had been destroyed. A deliberate circle of creation following destruction. A future growing from the soil of the past. Carell closed her eyes briefly, holding the container against her chest in a gesture that transcended species differences in its raw emotion. When she opened them again, her violet gaze was clear and focused on what lay ahead. As the security team prepared her for transport, securing her restraints for the journey, she maintained the quiet dignity that had increasingly defined her during the later stages of her captivity. There was no resignation in her bearing, but rather a patient determination, the stance of someone who understood that meaningful change required time and persistence. The shuttle departure was routine, unmarked by ceremony or acknowledgement. To most of the station's personnel, it was simply the transfer of another prisoner, unremarkable in the ongoing operations of post-war administration. But for Marcus, watching from the observation deck as the small craft pulled away from the station, it represented something far more significant. Not an ending, but a continuation, the next stage in a process that had begun with a desperate prisoner's offer and evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated. "Safe journey," he whispered, as the shuttle disappeared into the vastness of space, carrying with it both a prisoner and a possibility, the seed of a future where understanding might finally take root in the ashes of conflict. 6 months passed. Life on Outpost Epsilon returned to its regulated rhythms. The incident with the Draven commander gradually fading from collective memory as new priorities emerged. The fragile ceasefire between humans and Dravens held. Though diplomatic progress remained slow and tentative, each side wary of the other's intentions. Marcus continued his duties in the medical bay, his work competent, but no longer consuming. The passion that had driven him following the loss of his family had neither disappeared nor remained unchanged. It had transformed into something quieter, but more sustainable. A commitment to healing rather than vengeance. He received occasional updates on the Conservation Division's work through official channels. Clinical reports that mentioned Subject K-Rel only in the context of broader cultural preservation efforts. According to these sterile documents, she was adapting well to her new environment, providing valuable documentation of pre-war Draven traditions and participating in controlled botanical experiments, comparing Earth and Draven flora. What the reports couldn't convey, what Marcus could only imagine, was her continued personal evolution. The development of her unique perspective that blended elements of both worlds. He thought of her often, wondering about the small seed he had sent, whether it had germinated in its new environment, whether she understood the full meaning of his gesture. Then, on an ordinary day, distinguished only by a minor equipment malfunction in the medical lab, Marcus received an unexpected communication from Europa Station. It was officially addressed from Dr. Isabel Torres, director of the Conservation Division, requesting Marcus's expertise regarding a unique xenobiological development with potential medical applications. Attached to the formal request was a data file containing images of a plant, one that Marcus recognized immediately as a hybrid. The accompanying notes explained that Subject K-Rel had successfully cross-pollinated the Earth species seed she had brought with her, origin unspecified in the records, with a preserved specimen of Valen root, creating a viable hybrid that exhibited characteristics of both parent plants, but with enhanced medicinal properties. The final image in the file showed the hybrid plant in full bloom, its flowers combining the deep purple of Valen with the structural resilience of the Earth species. Beneath the image was a caption in the formal, impersonal language of scientific documentation. Subject proposes naming the new hybrid Concordia Hail Rel to acknowledge its dual heritage. Marcus stared at the image for a long time, understanding the message beneath the clinical language. She had taken his symbolic gesture and transformed it into something real and living, a creation that embodied their shared vision of integration rather than opposition. And in naming it, she had found a way to acknowledge their connection without violating the prohibition on direct communication. The official request from Dr. Torres concluded with an invitation for Marcus to visit Europa Station as a consulting specialist to evaluate the hybrid plant's potential medical applications. It was carefully worded to focus on the scientific value of the consultation, making no mention of any personal connection to the subject who had developed the hybrid. "Are you going to accept?" Eliza asked when he shared the communication with her. Marcus nodded, a quiet certainty in his voice. "Yes, for scientific reasons, of course." Eliza smiled, understanding the multiple layers of his response. "Of course. The hybrid's medical potential should definitely be evaluated by someone with your expertise." As Marcus began preparing the necessary documentation for the consultation visit, he found himself thinking of K-Rel's drawing, the simple yet powerful image of a figure that was neither fully human nor fully Draven, standing between two worlds. The hybrid plant was a living embodiment of that vision, proof that something new and valuable could emerge from the space between former enemies. Whether their personal reunion would lead to further evolution of their relationship remained uncertain. The constraints of their respective positions, he as a human medical officer, she as a Draven prisoner, however privileged her current status, created boundaries that might prove insurmountable. But the seed they had planted together had taken root and flourished against all odds. The possibility they had nurtured, of understanding across the chasms of species and history, had manifested in a form that others could see and recognize. Whatever came next, that achievement would remain a small but significant step toward a future where differences might be sources of strength rather than conflict. As Marcus completed his application for travel to Europa Station, he included a personal note to be delivered to the Conservation Division, looking forward to examining the Concordia hybrid and discussing its potential with its developer. Some creations transcend their origins, becoming bridges rather than barriers. This appears to be such a creation. It was, he knew, as close to a direct message as the regulations would allow. But like the seed he had sent and the flower Carell had preserved, sometimes the most profound communications required no explicit words, only the shared understanding of two beings who had glimpsed, however briefly, the possibility of something beyond the categories that had defined them. In the vastness of space, amid the wreckage of war and the tentative beginnings of peace, their small act of creation offered a quiet but insistent reminder. No being is only what they were created to be. With understanding, with connection, with the courage to see beyond established boundaries, transformation becomes possible. And from transformation, hope